In this video, I'm going to be philosophizing more on meaningful emotions, and specifically I want to focus on certain qualities of our experience that pertain more to positive and negatives, and I want to move away more from the qualities and focus more on the properties and the specific properties. And there's two types of properties I want to discuss here. These are the objective properties as well as the aesthetic properties, and both of these they come into play in regards to how they are connective with each other, but how they pertain to different ultimate sourcings of where we understand and come to learn these properties through specific learns and well-defined learns. And it's important to also understand the valences of emotions. So not only do we have positive or negative valences, we also have meaningful and meaningless valences. And these are various characteristics that become associated that help us to navigate the direction of meaningful information that's operating with any sort of cause and effect relationship that as a must regard a specific subjectivo-objectivo relationship and pertain to a specific direction of which that meaningful information is a passageway to, and which regards the mente-é-corpo connections that we form in regards to how we mentalize meaningful information through our direct perceptions as it pertains to the self and surrounds. And not just the self and surrounds, what is external to us in the surrounding environment that's we're forming these perceptions from inputs of information that's being transduced from our sensors and translated within our direct perception experiences, in which we have often emotional experiences, right? These are, as much as they're connected to the mind and they require the mind to be able to perceive them, they have bodily components to them and these sensations, and often there's a warm and cold valence to them, and we tend to optimally enjoy the warmer, cooling emotions. And typically we gravitate towards the warmer emotions, but we also like cool emotions and feelings. We don't like to be too hot or too cold. There tends to be this sort of Goldilocks zone in which we hold a we have thermoregulators in our body, and serotonin is actually an important neurotransmitter for thermoregulation. And it's what's called thermophilic. But there's also a term I've instantiated called coolophilic, which pertains just to this. It's well defined in regards to, as a must, good enough and necessarily conditions to constitute a balance between what keeps us in homeostasis specifically, and that's that golden range of that heating and cooling that provides these coolophilic emotions. We gravitate towards thermoregulations that allow us to sustain an optimal range of temperatures within the body that have a well-defined about 20 degrees Celsius. We like these temperatures around kind of what spring weather would be like here in Canada, or even the summer, but not too hot, between 17 degrees to about maybe 25 degrees Celsius. And these temperatures are more coolophilic, though we can still drop, and we sometimes enjoy, say, 8 degrees, and sometimes like the colder temperatures, but we don't really like going too far. We don't like the minus. We don't like the negatives per se, like the past freezing point, right, when water starts to freeze. These are very, very uncomfortable. And we also have certain negative associations that we even attribute to other individuals who are cold and more distant. And these have particular directions in which they help us to navigate our own direct perception in regards to perception, action, and behavior, cause and effect relationships that, as a must, constitute from good enough and necessarily conditions regarding valid and psychologically true, meaningful component parts and processes that we perceive the specific elements in which we composition sentences regarding language processes that we word thought, specifically called meaningful utterances of thought, as we think about how we feel about something or how our body feels in regards to something, and which can almost always has a particular valence that allows us to more effectively and efficiently navigate specific behaviors in a manner that's actually functional rather than perceived to be functional, and which constitutes ultimately any sort of functionality or multifunctionality is the amount of functions. And something that's dysfunctional, a well-defined definition for dysfunctional, is it lacks functions. So it can't actually validate a valid, psychologically true and meaningful function, and that's typically what causes a dysfunction. And oftentimes, even when we're looking at mental illness or even physical illness, what ends up happening is that there's a lack of function, and sometimes you have other functions that are attempting to compensate for another function. And typically that operates within multifunctionalities. So you have something that, like a perception, for example, is multifunctional, and typically it's there to allow us to meet whatever psychological need we necessitate it. And psychological needs are infinite, near infinite. We can necessitate any sort of psychological need. And even within the categorization of a specific psychological need, for example, food, we have food preferences. So not all foods would be able to actually meet our psychological need to be able to consume, because oftentimes we're actually searching for specific neuronutrients within food that we actually need, where not all food actually can provide those same psychological needs. So we actually do make these very nuanced distinctions too, which is very, very important. Eating the same thing isn't also conducive to the most optimal states of well-being and to healthy physical and psychological functioning, as well as ultimately physical, psychological health and psychological and physical well-being that allows us to live more meaningful lives. And understanding the valences of our meaningful emotions is highly important to being able to live meaningfully. And that's all I want to say for this video. I hope you enjoy. Have an awesome one. Bye.